Hello everyone. In today's video I bring you an impressive story full of revelations from heaven. Let's meet Marisol Thorne, a former California nurse who died more than 17 minutes after a horrific car accident and returned with a direct message from Jesus about the hidden power of fasting and what's to come in the years to come. During her out-of-body experience, she was taken to the courts of heaven, where she saw threads of light connecting the earth to the throne of God, and was given an urgent mission for the church. What she witnessed on the other side is something you need to hear until the end. So leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Oh, and right here in the comments which city you're watching this video in. Let's spread this message all over the world. Now prepare yourself for a powerful and transformative spiritual journey. I remember the stillness of that morning as if it were a long sigh between God and my soul. At age 45, after 2 decades dedicated as a nurse, my Christian ministry in Sacramento seemed to have turned into a comfortable routine. Prayers recited from memory, meetings that always followed the same script, a secure but sparkless faith. On that day in September 2023, I woke up before sunrise feeling a gentle heaviness in my heart, almost as if the Holy Spirit was whispering something urgent. I sat on the edge of the bed, closed my eyes, and began to pray. Words flowed effortlessly, but an inner voice, clear and firm, interrupted my mental dialogue. Fast for 7 days on pure water. I will speak to you. A chill ran down my spine, but not from fear, from recognition. I got up slowly, walked to the kitchen without turning on any lights, prepared a glass of water, and decided to give myself completely to that call. There was no internal debate. There was an unshakable certainty that this fast would be unlike any other I had ever tried. As the clock ticked 4:17, I felt my body respond with a mix of awe and anticipation, as if I was about to enter unknown yet safe territory. In the days that followed, my routine changed radically. Each morning began with prolonged prayer and silent meditation, my empty stomach turning into an altar of dependence. The outside world, sounds of cars passing by, neighbors' voices, constant cell phone notifications, became secondary to the growing intensity of what I felt inside. By the 4th day, fasting no longer felt like an effort. It was like breathing, natural and indispensable. The night before the 7th day, I felt a peace that surpassed all human understanding. I knew something monumental was coming, not as a distant event but as a personal summons that demanded total surrender. I closed my eyes in that moment, silently murmuring, "Here I am, Lord. I speak your name and I trust your purpose." On the Isadando morning of the 7th day, the sun was still barely peeking over the horizon as I drove in silence through the quiet streets of Sacramento. My heart beat in tune with every sip of water I had taken since the previous dawn, no longer out of physical thirst but out of spiritual thirst. Fresh air filled the car through the half-open window, carrying scents of damp grass and distant pine trees. As I approached the intersection of Del Paso Boulevard and Arden Way, my thoughts were immersed in a simple, almost whispered prayer. Lord, reveal yourself to me today. Suddenly, a rumble cut through the air like thunder shattering the peace. I felt the impact before I even understood what was happening. The car shook violently, my body was thrown against the steering wheel, and everything became chaos in slow motion. The glass shattered into millions of sparkling particles that danced in the morning light. In the next instant, the physical world ceased to exist. My consciousness hovered above the scene. I saw my body motionless, blood spreading on the dashboard, rescuers running in slow motion, their voices muffled as if they were coming from underwater. A man wearing a paramedic's uniform knelt beside me, pressing against my chest with desperate urgency. But there was no pain, just a strange sense of serenity as my spirit watched everything from an invisible vantage point. The seconds dragged by like hours, although I later learned that my heart had stopped for exactly 17 minutes and 23 seconds. In this interval, time and space lost meaning. There was no fear or confusion, just a strange sense of detachment as my spirit was drawn to something that didn't belong in this world. And then, as if passing through a thin veil, I felt myself being pulled away from that scene of destruction. Not by physical force, but by a gentle, irresistible current emanating from a light so pure that it eclipsed any memory of darkness. As my consciousness was guided away from chaos, the earthly world gave way to an infinite corridor of light. It was not a tunnel in the physical sense, but an ethereal passage where every second seemed simultaneously endless and instantaneous. The light was not blinding. On the contrary, it enveloped me like a blanket of soft, comforting warmth. There was no sound, but I heard melodies made of pure harmony, not musical notes, but vibrations of love and peace that penetrated every atom of my being. As I progressed, I realized that my earthly worries, my fears, and my pains were left behind like leaves blown away by the wind. There was no judgment, just complete acceptance. A sense of belonging washed over me. It was like returning home, after a long journey, even though I had never been there before. Suddenly, the hallway opened up to something my human eyes could never conceive. I stretched my spiritual gaze over vast celestial gardens where colors danced in vivid patterns, blues deeper than the ocean, golds brighter than the midday sun, purples that resonated like soft laughter. Floating around were translucent structures and shapes that seemed to be made of pure light, casting shimmering reflections in all directions. What caught my attention most, however, were thin threads of golden light that stretched from the floor of those gardens to infinite points on the horizon and beyond. Threads that, in an instant of divine clarity, I understood to be spiritual channels. Each strand represented a sincere prayer, a fast offered in humility, an act of surrender that opened a portal of grace between earth and that realm. I wanted to touch one of them, but before my desire manifested itself, I felt a presence. There was no figure, but a feeling of love so intense that it made me cry. Tears that were not of sadness, but of reverence. At that moment, I understood that I was in the outer courts of heaven, a meeting place between the Creator and His creations. The light around me seemed to pulse in response to my consciousness, as if it were alive and aware of me. And then, without warning, I felt myself being pulled deeper into the heart of that place, as if something or someone was about to reveal truths to me that transcended all human understanding. In the next instant, I felt a subtle shift in the air, as if the light itself had shaped a more intimate space around me. Then he appeared, not as a human image, but as a presence of pure luminosity and love, so alive that my soul seemed to vibrate in resonance with its essence. There was no need for audible words. His voice spoke directly to my spirit, each thought conveyed as waves of warmth and understanding. Marisol, I clearly felt his call. The fasting you practice is not a mere exercise in discipline. It is an act of partnership with me. Each day of sincere renunciation weaves a channel that allows my power to flow to the earth. As his words echoed through my being, images appeared before me like scenes on a great celestial panel. Mountains being healed, spiritual prisons breaking, multitudes kneeling in fervent prayer, and entire cities enveloped in golden light. I understood that each thread of light I had seen represented not just individual prayers but collective chains of intercession and fasting, connecting places, churches, and even nations to the heart of God. When you fast, he continued, we create portals of grace, portals that break chains, strengthen spiritual authority, and prepare my people for challenges to come. But only humility and purity of heart can sustain these portals. Do not seek signs or recognition, seek my face. As his presence enveloped me, I felt a surge of compassion for the world below, a love that passed all understanding. Every fiber of my being was immersed in a divine mission, to bring this revelation to the church as an urgent call, not an optional one. Finally, he said without audible words but with absolute certainty, "Go back and tell, for I send." Then, as if a veil gently closed, I was pulled back through the light. my consciousness returning to the body that at that very moment was being resuscitated in the arms of paramedics. My last realization before full return was one of gratitude, an unshakable certainty that nothing would be the same as before. The return to my body was abrupt and at the same time serene. I felt each faint beat of my heart starting again, like a gentle drum announcing my rebirth. I opened my eyes in a flash of white. Emergency lights were flashing above me, racing voices were echoing around me, but I felt no pain, just a deep sense of peace, as if I had just awakened from a restful sleep. I was later informed that when she was found clinically dead for more than 17 minutes, the doctors had initiated advanced resuscitation protocols without expecting miracles, just following procedures. I soon noticed movement around me, nurses running, machines beeping, the metallic smell of disinfectant in the air. A doctor approached, his face expressing surprise and disbelief. "Dr. Thorne, you are fine. The tests show that there is no brain damage, no serious organic impairment. It is an inexplicable case." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. Instead, he smiled, a smile that carried something within it that transcended all medical logic. In the hours that followed, I was moved to a private room surrounded by family and ministry colleagues who had rushed to the hospital upon hearing the news of the accident. Every hug, every tear shared, was as if I felt the presence of something greater flowing through those human gestures. But there was also a silent urgency in my spirit. I needed to process, translate, and document everything I had experienced so I could tell the world. That night, as I lay in a hospital bed, my mind revisited every detail of the outer courts of heaven, the colors, the melodies, the strands of light, and especially the voice of Jesus. Such a deep peace took over my being that even though I was exhausted, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I picked up a notebook and began writing what would later become the skeleton of this testimony. As the days went by, doctors repeated tests. They all came back with normal results. My cognitive functions were intact. My reflexes were quick. My muscular strength was surprising for someone who had suffered multi-system failure. The medical community classified my case as a clinical miracle. For me, it was confirmation that the spiritual realm had irrevocably touched the ground of my reality. But something else was in store. 4 days after my resuscitation, my heart stopped again, this time for 4 minutes and 12 seconds, and the portal reopened, returning me to the same light and reaffirming the magnitude of the calling I had received. The second cardiac arrest occurred in a silent dawn, 4 days after the accident. I was sleeping in my hospital room when suddenly I felt my heart stop beating, as if the steady rhythm that sustained my life had simply stopped. Once again, the pain and fear were not there, just that same current of soft light enveloping me and dragging me out of my body. This time, however, the transition was quicker, almost like returning to a familiar place. Within moments, I was back in the vast celestial gardens where the light danced in even more vibrant patterns. But what surprised me most was the panoramic vision that unfolded before me. Scenes of people in every corner of the world participating in biblical fasts. Individuals kneeling in modest homes, churches gathered in reverent silence, spiritual leaders praying in unison. Each act of sincere renunciation gave rise to new golden threads, connecting each thirsty heart to the source of all life. As I watched, I noticed spiritual fruits taking shape, chains of liberation involving people trapped in addictions and trauma, entire cities receiving a collective sense of hope and peace, entire communities witnessing physical and emotional healing. These were not mere symbolic images. I felt the transformative reality of each scene like waves of energy vibrating in the celestial air. Then I heard Jesus' voice again, this time quieter but full of power. "See the impact of what you have begun. This testimony is not just for you. It is for millions. Every life achieved on this spiritual plane is reflected in the physical. Keep counting. Keep guiding. For the unified fast will lay eternal foundations." A sense of elation filled my heart. as I absorbed the magnitude of what I witnessed. It was not just a personal calling, but a global calling. I could feel the urgency and responsibility rising within me. A mission that transcended time, culture, and borders. Suddenly, I was pulled back into my body, regaining consciousness in the blink of an eye. The heart monitor set off alarms and nurses rushed to revive me. When I woke up, I knew my life would never be the same. I had seen what God was doing in the world, and now I was tasked with sharing that vision with every soul willing to listen. Upon returning to the hospital bed for the second time, my body was shaking slightly, not because of weakness, but because of the intensity of what I had just experienced. My eyes met the worried face of the nurse next to me, and a peaceful smile appeared on my lips, as if I were carrying a secret so great that the peace it contained was contagious. Over the next few days, as I recovered at home, every moment turned into a silent prayer of gratitude and urgency. I knew I couldn't keep it to myself. I shared my testimony first with Pastor Rebecca Hill, my spiritual mentor. When she heard him, she cried, her shoulders shaking between disbelief and reverence. "Marisol," she said between sobs, "this will shake hearts and build the kingdom." Together, we began organizing church meetings, inviting local leaders to understand that fasting was not an isolated act, but a divine channel of collective transformation. As reports of healings and deliverances began to emerge, Ethan Morales overcoming years of addiction, families reconciling in miraculous restorations, it became clear that something bigger was in motion. Entire cities felt waves of hope that went beyond motivational slogans. It was the palpable manifestation of grace in action. Calling became an urgent invitation, not as a religious ritual to earn merit, but as an active partnership with God to prepare our hearts and communities for days of trial. I explained that each sincere fast is a prophetic act, breaking spiritual chains and building bridges of heavenly power on earth. Now, I write this account with an unwavering purpose: to mobilize the body of Christ to reclaim biblical fasting, not as an obligation, but as a tool of faith that positions each believer to exercise spiritual authority. The time to act is now. The portal of grace is open. It is up to us to decide to cross it in unity and humility, so that the light I have received can radiate hope, healing, and transformation in all nations. As I wrapped up my testimony before the congregation and then shared it at regional meetings, it became clear that the urgency of the message could not be confined to the four walls of a church. The stories of transformation, people finding freedom from addictions, families reconciling, after decades of bitterness, entire communities experiencing peace, served as evidence that the gateway of grace was active and bearing real fruit. But along with the miracles came questions and resistance. Religious leaders concerned about emotional excesses, skeptics accusing me of fantasy, and even well-meaning members fearing that the focus on fasting would turn into legalism. In each challenge, however, I saw yet another opportunity to strengthen the central truth. Fasting is not about rules, but about relationships. It is not about self-punishment, but about covenant with God to fulfill His purpose on earth. With a firm voice and a yielding heart, I continue to call on the church to embrace this calling, knowing that in doing so, each believer becomes a living channel of transformation, ready to face the days ahead with authority and hope. The decision remains before us. Do we keep faith in the unseen and step through the portal of grace, or do we remain comfortable in the spiritual rut while the world around us cries out for divine intervention? The choice is ours, and the time is now urgent. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.